That night Johnny Carson's desk held John Wayne. And one sentence made Johnny's hands start trembling. His voice cut out, and America's two most powerful men stared at each other in silence. It was April 1978. The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. Studio 6B in Burbank, California. The marquee outside announced a guest that needed no introduction, John Wayne. The Duke. American icon. The man who had defined masculinity and heroism for 3 generations of moviegoers. The audience was electric. 300 people crammed into the studio, some who had waited months for tickets, all hoping to see the legend in person. The band played the familiar Tonight Show theme. Ed McMahon delivered his legendary introduction with extra enthusiasm. "Here's Johnny!" Johnny walked out to thunderous applause, waving to the crowd, that familiar smile in place. He launched into his monologue, jokes about politics, about Hollywood, about everyday life. The audience laughed at all the right moments. Everything was perfect. Everything was routine. Until John Wayne walked onto that stage. The applause was deafening. People stood. Some were crying before he even sat down. Because everyone in that studio could see what the cameras would capture in cruel detail. John Wayne was dying. He'd lost weight. Significant weight. His signature broad shoulders seemed diminished inside his Western-style shirt. His walk, that iconic John Wayne swagger that had carried him through hundreds of films, was slower, more careful, like each step required consideration. But his eyes were still sharp. Still defiant. Still the Duke. Johnny stood to greet him, shaking his hand, helping him settle into the guest chair. The audience finally quieted, sitting back down, the energy in the room shifting from excitement to something more reverent. "Duke," Johnny said, his voice warm but careful. "It's wonderful to have you here." "Good to be here, Johnny," Wayne replied, his voice that familiar gravelly drawl that had narrated American cinema for 40 years. They talked about movies. About Wayne's recent film, his last Western. The conversation was light, careful, both men dancing around the obvious question that hung in the studio air like smoke. And then, 8 minutes into the interview, John Wayne decided to stop dancing. "Johnny," he said, interrupting a question about his co-stars, "I need to tell you something. And I need America to hear it." Johnny's smile faltered. His hand, resting casually on his desk, went still. Carson stopped mid-question. The entire studio froze. Wayne shifted in his chair, leaning forward slightly. "I've got cancer, Johnny. Stomach cancer. They took out my stomach, part of my intestines, my gallbladder. Told me I might have a year. Maybe less." The studio gasped. Literally gasped. 300 people inhaling sharply at once, the sound caught perfectly by the boom microphones overhead. Johnny's face went pale. His hand, the one resting on the desk, began to tremble. Visibly. The cameras caught it. America watching at home saw Johnny Carson, master of composure, king of late-night television, physically shaking. "Duke, Johnny's voice failed. He cleared his throat, tried again. "I don't know what to say." "Nothing to say," Wayne replied with a slight smile. "Just wanted people to know the truth. I'm tired of the rumors. Tired of the whispers. Rather tell folks myself." Ed McMahon, off to the side, had tears running down his face. The band was completely silent. Doc Severinsen sat with his trumpet in his lap, staring at the stage like he was witnessing something sacred. Johnny looked down at his desk, at his trembling hand, at the blue cue cards that suddenly seemed utterly meaningless. When he looked back up at John Wayne, his eyes were wet. "How long have you known?" Johnny asked quietly. "Couple months. Been through the surgery. Been through the treatments. Now I'm just—" Wayne paused, choosing his words carefully. "Living what's left." To understand what happened next, you need to understand what John Wayne meant to Johnny Carson. Johnny wasn't just a fan. He'd grown up on John Wayne movies. As a kid in Nebraska in the 1930s, Johnny would save his nickels to go to the Saturday matinee and watch Wayne ride across the screen, larger than life, representing everything America wanted to believe about itself: courage, honor, strength. When Johnny moved to California to pursue television, one of his secret dreams was to someday meet John Wayne. To shake his hand. To tell him what those movies had meant to a lonely kid in the Midwest who dreamed of escaping to something bigger. They'd met several times over the years. Wayne had been a guest on The Tonight Show before, back in the late 60s. They'd developed a friendship, not close, but genuine. Two men who understood what it meant to carry an image, to represent something larger than yourself. But this was different. This wasn't the invincible Duke who conquered the frontier and won wars single-handedly. This was a man, mortal, vulnerable, dying. Sitting in Johnny's guest chair and telling America he had months to live. Johnny knew something else too. Something the audience didn't know. Something that made this moment even more devastating. 3 weeks earlier, Johnny's own father had been diagnosed with cancer. The same kind. Stomach cancer. The doctors had given him 6 months. Johnny had been flying back to Nebraska every weekend, sitting beside his father's hospital bed, watching a strong man waste away, feeling utterly powerless. He hadn't told anyone publicly. Hadn't mentioned it on the show. It was private. Family business. And now here was John Wayne, his childhood hero, his friend, sitting across from him describing the same disease, the same prognosis, the same slow march toward the inevitable. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Johnny reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a handkerchief. He didn't try to hide it. He dabbed at his eyes, openly crying on national television. "I'm sorry, Duke," he said, his voice thick. "I'm not usually. I don't normally." "I know," Wayne said gently. "It's okay, Johnny." "No, it's—" Johnny stopped, composing himself. "Can I tell you something? Can I tell you in America something I haven't told anyone?" Wayne nodded. "Of course." Johnny took a breath. The studio was so silent you could hear the hum of the cameras. "My father," Johnny said slowly, "has the same thing. Stomach cancer. They told us 3 weeks ago. He's in a hospital in Nebraska right now. And I've been sitting here every night doing this show, making jokes, interviewing people, pretending everything is fine. Because that's what I do. That's what I'm supposed to do." He looked directly at Wayne. "But I don't know how to do that anymore. I don't know how to pretend when the two most important men in my life are." His voice broke. He couldn't finish the sentence. Wayne leaned forward in his chair. With visible effort, his body clearly weak, clearly in pain, he stood up. The audience watched in stunned silence as John Wayne walked the few steps to Johnny's desk. Backstage, he made a choice no producer would have ever allowed. In the control room, director Bobby Quinn was frozen. His hand hovered over the button that would cut to commercial. Producer Fred DeCordova stood behind him, tears streaming down his face, and quietly said, "Don't you dare cut. Let it play." John Wayne reached Johnny's desk. He placed one weathered hand on Johnny's shoulder. "Listen to me," Wayne said, his voice strong despite his weakened body. "Your father, he's a good man?" "The best," Johnny whispered. "Then you honor him. Not by pretending. Not by being strong all the time. You honor him by being honest. By feeling what you feel. By letting people see that even Johnny Carson is human." Johnny looked up at him, this icon, this legend, standing beside his desk offering comfort in his final months of life. "How do you do it?" Johnny asked. "How do you sit here and tell millions of people you're dying and still smile? Still make it seem like it's okay?" Wayne smiled, that famous John Wayne smile that had lit up movie screens for 40 years. "Because it is okay, Johnny. We all go. Every single one of us. The only question is how we go. Do we hide? Do we pretend we're not scared? Or do we look it in the eye and say, I'm here. I showed up. I lived. He squeezed Johnny's shoulder. Your father knows you love him. He knows. And when his time comes, he'll go knowing he raised a son who made America laugh every single night. That's not nothing, Johnny. That's everything. The audience erupted. Not in applause, not yet. In something else. A collective release of emotion. Sobs. Gasps. The sound of 300 hearts breaking together. Ed McMahon was openly weeping. Doc Severinsen had his face in his hands. The camera operators were crying behind their equipment. But this was the moment no one in the studio, nor anyone at home, ever saw coming. Johnny stood up from behind his desk. He walked around it, something he never did during interviews, and embraced John Wayne. Right there on national television. No jokes. No setup. No punchline. Just two men holding each other while America watched. The hug lasted 15 seconds. Wayne patted Johnny's back, the gesture of a father comforting a son. When they separated, both men had tears streaming down their faces. Johnny reached into his desk drawer and pulled out something small. A photograph. Old. Black and white. Worn at the edges from years of handling. I've carried this since I was 10 years old, Johnny said, holding it up. The camera zoomed in. It showed a young boy. Clearly Johnny, standing next to a movie poster for Stagecoach, John Wayne's breakthrough film. The boy was smiling, holding a toy gun, trying to look as tough as the cowboy on the poster. My father took this picture, Johnny continued. Outside the Orpheum Theater in Norfolk, Nebraska. 1936. I'd just seen you ride across that screen for the first time. I went home and told my dad I wanted to be brave like that. Like John Wayne. He handed the photograph to Wayne, who took it with trembling hands and stared at it for a long moment. Keep it, Johnny said. Please. I want you to have it. Because you taught me what I taught my father. That being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means showing up anyway. Wayne looked at the photograph, then at Johnny, then at the audience. He carefully tucked the photo into his shirt pocket, over his heart. I'll carry this with me, Wayne said, his voice hoarse with emotion. However long that is. The studio finally released its held breath. The audience stood, every single person, and applauded. Not the excited applause of entertainment. The reverent applause of people who knew they'd witnessed something that transcended television. Johnny and Wayne stood there together, side by side, as the cameras kept rolling and America watched two icons be completely, devastatingly human. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. John Wayne died 11 months later, in June 1979. The photograph Johnny gave him was in his jacket pocket when he passed away. His family found it and returned it to Johnny with a note. He looked at this every day. Said it reminded him why it all mattered. Johnny's father died 2 months before Wayne, in April 1979. Johnny was with him at the end, holding his hand, telling him about the night John Wayne stood beside his desk and taught him that being real mattered more than being strong. When John Wayne died that June, Johnny opened the Tonight Show with a simple tribute. He sat at his desk, held up the photograph Wayne had carried in his final months, and said just 7 words. The Duke taught me how to live. Then he placed the photograph in a frame and kept it on his desk for the remaining 13 years of his Tonight Show run. Every guest who sat across from him could see it. A reminder that vulnerability isn't weakness. That honesty is the bravest performance of all. The night Johnny retired in 1992, he donated that photograph to the Smithsonian. It sits there today with a small plaque. 2 American icons, 1 human moment, April 1978. That April night changed television forever. It showed America that even legends bleed. Even heroes cry. And sometimes the most important thing you can do is stop pretending and just be real.